Good morning, everybody. It's with real pleasure that I invite you and welcome you to the Premier's Reading Challenge and to Dymocks Literacy Foundation's Authors Online. And we have a very special guest today, Anna Fienberg. For those of you who had the pleasure of hearing Anna speak at the Premier's reception last year, you know what a treat everybody's in for. Anna's one of those very special authors in a select group who have books on every list on the Premier's Reading Challenge. She has written for every age group that we cater for and is popular in all those lists. So I know that all of you have got a real fondness for Anna. I've talked to a couple of people in year 7, 8, 9 and they have liked Anna's books since they read Tashi in year 3. So I know that there's some very long-standing fans out there very keen to hear Anna speak. So I'll go straight to Anna. Thank you.
So this book, I really enjoyed writing this book, but it was sort of creepy as well. And it came to me really in just sort of one night, which is often how books happen. Then you books, of course, you spend months and years. I'd actually gone to Italy, and we stayed in Fienberg in this house, which was beautiful, but the cold was all around like a moat in a fairy tale. The snow was really deep, and most of the family went skiing every day, and I tended to look after the baby, so there was just this deep silence around me, and it was cold, and people hurried past each other in the streets with their coats all done up, and nobody seemed to glance at each other because it was very, very cold. And this deepening sense of isolation I had. And then one night my husband came home from school with, and I thought he would have had a great time. He came home and he said, "Oh, ma quella gente fredda come la bacala," which means that those friends, they're just cold and stiff like the bacala, which is the dried fish that tends to hang in the alimentari shops, in the food shops, delicatessens. And they lie there like that, those fish, frozen and cold and stiff and dry. And I thought, that's a great image, that people are just as sort of dead and cold as those fish. And so it was really from that image, I suppose, that the idea started to develop about people not communicating and secrets sort of festering, and is our secrets in a way. And so the book started to develop. And I think really for me, and I would imagine that probably most writers feel this, that you tend to, if you're going to write a novel which might take a year or two, you write about something that you really care about, because you're going to be living with that idea and those characters for quite a long time. And I think that's really the motive for me for writing, is that I care about something deeply, and often when I'm writing, I actually discover what I really think, which is a funny sort of thing, but writing forces you to take things apart and analyse them and feel them perhaps a bit more intensely. So it can be very therapeutic too. Even if no one ever reads it, it can be a really a lovely thing to do, to get to know yourself and also the world and the subject that you're passionate about.
My question is, how long did it take you to write your longest book?
Well, I would have, a few years ago, I would have said 2 years, because there was a book I wrote that took that long. But lately I've just finished writing an adult book, and it took 6.5 years. So that's a bit of a record for me. But they can vary a lot. If a book is hard to write, in that perhaps initially the idea takes you over, and it's a wonderful feeling, that it's a bit like falling in love. You can get totally swept away into another world, but then sometimes halfway through you can get stuck, and so things take a bit longer and a bit longer and a bit longer. And a book called Borrowed Light took quite a while, took longer than anything else. I think that was about 2 years. But yes, lately I've just finished an adult book that took 6 years. So that's a bit of a record. I'm hoping the next one I write will be considerably less.
Yeah, have you got a question for Anna?
Yeah, what was the hardest book for you to write?
Oh, the hardest book. What was the question? Yes, what was the hardest book to write? perhaps all in all, there was a book, The Witch in the Lake, that I wrote, which I actually ended up sobbing through the entire second half. It was a book that began actually as a children's book, a picture book, because in my contract with the publisher, Alan Unwin, I'd written 2 books, and the last book to write was a picture book. And at that stage, I just didn't have any ideas particularly for that age group, and I was having a lot of difficulty, and my son asked me one night, he was about 5, I think then, and he said, tell me a really scary story, a story so that I have to keep all the lights on, when we go to sleep, and I stay up half the night, and so I didn't really want that to happen, but it was a challenge. So he got into bed, and I sat down next to him, and I thought, scary story, witches, because, that's what you usually think of, isn't it? When I tell the story, I thought medieval Italy, those narrow, dark, cobbled streets, and perhaps there's a little village somewhere in Tuscany, and it's on a hill, and down the bottom of the hill there's a big, dark lake, and at the bottom of the lake there lives a witch, and every full moon the witch comes out, draping her seaweed and her great, dark, empty eyes, and she's ravenous, and one of her favourite meals is little children. A bit like the Baba Yaga, which we wrote later on with Tashi. But so there's the idea of the full moon and this dreadful witch and her appetite for little children. And I started to tell my son more and more about this, and he went very quiet. But as I looked at this witch, I saw sort of behind her eyes this terrible grief and sort of rage, and I felt she was a really complex person, and then something had happened to turn her into this evil kind of being. But I thought she was really human too, and I got more and more interested in all these scenes behind her eyes, and finally my son said, well, that's really scary, that's sort of enough now, I think, because I won't be able to sleep at all, and as you go out, keep all the lights on down the corridor. So I went back to my room, and I thought, okay, well, that certainly isn't a picture book for little kids, but I'd got really interested in that character, so it became instead a novel more for your age. And as I got halfway through, I planned the book and so on, but as I got halfway through, I realised that this witch would, there would have to be some casualties, and for her to save the main character, there would have to be, yes, other casualties, and that was terrible. It took a long time to get over that. So some books are more difficult than others.
What made you want to become an author?
What made me want to become an author? It's a good question, isn't it? I think really it was reading books and listening to stories from the time I was very little. And I just loved it. And what I loved most was the escape into another world that you get within a couple of pages of a good book. And I mean, real life is fun and exciting often, but it can also be tedious and boring, like Billy Bear thought it was. And I realised that my best friend, in a way, was that book in my bag I could take wherever I went and escape into another world if I needed to. And I suppose I discovered when I was about 8, I started writing little stories, just half-page stories, but I found that if you write about something you love, the more you write about it, the more you realise different aspects about it, and you can live in that world. For instance, I had a thing about mermaids. I just loved the way mermaids could live, outside as well as inside the sea, and they had all sorts of adventures, and so when I wrote about mermaids, I really felt like I was under the sea, and I could see these mermaids. I was a mermaid, and I could swim so well, and I realised that writing was almost as good as reading, because you got to actually invent and control the world that you could escape into. And that's a pretty good feeling, actually.